variety of plant and animal life in the UK is so depleted it could cause an ecological meltdown.
More than a dozen people have died in India in the past 2 months due to a severe heat wave.
Our house is on fire.
Experts blame high temperatures driven by climate change.
Now time is running out to save the planet.
This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises.
We know that the climate crisis is threatening all life on Earth.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale.
The jury has reached the verdict, and it is damning.
And what, if anything, can be done to prevent the next catastrophe?
We still have time to reverse the damage we have done. That is why, on this World Environment Day, we are launching the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration.
David Attenborough famously said, "We must rewild the world to restore stability to our planet."
Hi, my name's Chris Sandham. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sussex and I do a lot of research on rewilding and ecological restoration. Rewilding means to me, it's just been such a defining point of my career. I was so excited when I first learnt about these ideas that nature creates opportunities for more and more diverse species to live alongside, and it doesn't need to be that human-controlled point all the time, and that was just so exciting to think that humans don't have to be creating every opportunity, that we can make small changes now or even some bigger ones like reintroducing some larger species, and then that being kind of sustainable conservation for the future. So people don't have to be part of rewilding. You can just step back and let nature get on with it, which is pretty exciting in itself. But people can also play a really important role. We're as much as part of nature as we are separate from it. You can get part of nature, you can start rooting, you can start managing it in a way that mimics nature, which could be a lot of fun. I do that bit in my garden, pretend to do some grazing, pretend to do some rooting, because I've got a small patch and I'm not going to get any other large herbivores in there. So it's quite fun just becoming part of nature as well.
Hi, I'm Jo Charlton and we're in my garden, which is in a sort of, I suppose for want of a better word, a sort of suburban area of housing on the edge of Lewes in East Sussex. We inherited a garden when we moved in that hadn't had much human activity in it because there hadn't been anyone living in the house for a while. I think what I did was I let it sit for a year and see what was here, see what happened, and then decided what to do from there after having seen the whole year through. So there's one area that we've kept almost completely meadow, and the hedges we've allowed to just sort of get bigger and thicker as well, so that they are providing more opportunity for birds. And we also put in a pond to sort of support the diversity of insects and various other animals and birds. There is a much wider range of things now that are growing in that area of meadowland and grassland than there was before. A greater variety of grasses and a greater variety of wildflowers and mosses and vetches and all things that would naturally grow on the downs, which is our sort of nearest local habitat. We have a vegetable patch where we rarely have to deal with any sort of problems in terms of, you know, invasive insects, because the spiders and the frogs and the slow worms all sort of manage it for us, really. We had a box hedge that was decimated by box moth, and a family of sparrows that had set up nest were able to feed their babies on these big juicy caterpillars that were hanging around. And so what's happened is actually our box hedge has really just come right back now and looking very healthy, but I also feel great about it because it's sort of, there's been a whole sequence of events that's allowed wildlife to exist in the garden. In keeping really with the ethos of the garden somehow, I tend to let things go over so that they have an opportunity to flower. And often, you know, for example, rocket, if you let it go over, suddenly there are a myriad of bees, you know, enjoying and using the flowers, and that just sort of supports the whole variety of what's available in the garden for things like bees, of which I've seen an enormous increase of, particularly in terms of types of bumblebee and solitary bees. And then we have visiting honeybees often.
The fight back against Extinction Britain is being led by young people inspired by Greta Thunberg.
What we need is young, passionate people at the start of their career bringing new ideas into the way we achieve conservation. You know, I start my lecture series on rewilding, you know, highlighting that we're failing in conservation. We are still part of a declining trend and loss of species, and that means that, you know, we're not succeeding. Now, we can do things better, but I think we're also going to have to do things a little bit differently in the future as well. And I think young people coming in and challenging the status quo, and then really thinking about, you know, what is actually working and what's, you know, working really well, and then also being a bit disruptive and coming in and saying, well, let's question those things as well, that might not be working as well as we want them to, and coming up with something new. And I feel like the next generation is so important to that process.
So right now we're in Maple Farm, which is a rewilding project just on the border of Surrey and Sussex. So small scale ecological projects like this, the goals are slightly different from larger ones because they're often just increase the biodiversity as much as possible within a given area. I don't necessarily think that's always the right course of action, but in this instance, we're really blessed with how many different potential habitats are around. So we are going to do that kind of project. The most exciting animals that we've caught on the site so far have been the nightingales. I just think it was a nightjar for a second, but no, it's definitely a nightingale. And you'll hear it today when you're walking around the site, you'll definitely hear it. It kind of pinballs between an oak tree over there and then a hedgerow over there. And I've seen it once in person, which was like completely euphoric. So that is so cool. I think part of the reason why they're here is because of NEP's awesome work nearby. I don't think they'd be here otherwise, so that's really cool. And then other stuff we've set up some camera traps. There's a family of badgers just on the south side near the ancient woodland I mentioned, which is really cool. Very, very dense with insect life. I'd say butterflies is probably the main event. If I was trying to get someone psyched to visit, I think that would be the core of my pitch. There's a really serious, well, depending on your philosophy, hogweed infestation or hogweed presence here. Just to give a sense of like quite how intense it is, we had some people from a company called EcoWeed come down who obviously just battle-hardened hogweed slayers who've been in the game for like 10 years kind of thing. And they said that this was the second worst infestation they'd ever seen. it's basically been presented to us from the conversations we've had as a problem. People say that it kind of outcompetes native vegetation, and which it definitely does. It spreads super quick. It's not like naturalized, so it doesn't have a huge amount of like biodiversity boost for native wildlife and things like that. So we were down to kind of maintain its numbers, but in an as non-destructive a way as we could. And I can't take my agency too much out of this. I was going to say we were like spoke to some people who suggested, but basically we made the choice to try and use glyphosate after trying out some different methods that weren't as effective. And that's something we definitely regret now, because even though we like applied it really precisely, we used as little as we could, there's a real kind of like scorched earth area around each of the different parts that we've used the glyphosate on. We had no connection to the landowner before. We'd had an internet presence for about 6 months. And then she, I guess, had just been Googling like rewilding organizations or something like that, and found us on our website, and was really quite a rare situation, because she has this beautiful 30 acres. Historically, at least in the time she's been using it, it's been used as an animal sanctuary, so quite heavily grazed. But she wanted to wind that down and do whatever she could to like boost biodiversity on the site.
In 50 years, we've lost over half of our farmland birds. 97% of wildflower meadows have gone, and with them insects and pollinators. We're experiencing what's called shifting baseline syndrome. We think the countryside looks as it should, but we've forgotten how it's meant to be.
The base idea behind DI Wilding was we felt that the rewilding world, in loads of different senses, has a really high barrier to entry. So there's the land, obviously. It's seen, and quite rightly in a lot of instances, as a bit of a posho pastime because it's like unproductive. Although now like various government grants are changing that.
And we start today with new plans from the government to pay farmers and landowners to adopt nature and climate-friendly practices.
It's the biggest shake-up of Britain's landscape in a generation, says the government. A $1 billion funding scheme designed firstly to incentivise sustainable farming, and secondly to reverse the decline of nature by paying landowners to rewild their properties. All possible since the UK left the EU's common agricultural policy.
There's obviously a knowledge base required to do work like this, but it isn't super technical. A lot of it's just letting stuff grow and like being comfortable with unkemptness. And I think just like reminding people that you can be a huge muggins like us and still do something pretty awesome is like a part of that term, which I really like. We felt that there was a human component to rewilding that wasn't getting enough airtime, because I think people got so, possibly rightly, like very caught up in the kind of thrill of wild meaning kind of non-human, and like taking ourselves out of the landscape, which is like it's a really thrilling concept for sure. But I think it misses a really huge component of rewilding's potential, which is like connecting us to the landscape. And I think there's something really beautiful about the process, and if you can involve humans as much as possible, rather than just like, let's say, a small unit of like professional landscapers, get as many people as want to be involved stuck in on like big volunteering days. And I think that isn't just like a peripheral part of the process when it's done well, but like a really core component of it. And I also feel like there's a slight, there's no need to get too dramatic with the language, but there's a slight justice component with getting younger people involved in this, because like we're the ones who've inherited this pretty desolate ecological landscape. And currently, just because I guess major decisions tend to happen in kind of the vintage crusty part of society, there's like a whole group of people, like our generation and younger, who are going to deal with these decisions and the ramifications, and maybe more pertinently, have a really particular view of how we want the countryside to be, which is just wilder and more exciting and less kempt and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it would be a huge shame if our voices weren't heard in that conversation.
So rewilding doesn't work for everyone, and so there are obstacles in the way, and that's simply because living with wildlife isn't necessarily always easy. I've seen wolves in the wild once in my life, and it's a fantastic experience for me. But wolves eat other animals, and if that happens to be the sheep you're trying to raise, that's a major problem. I get, seeing beavers in the wild and all their fantastic things they can do is a joy for me and a lot of other people. They're also fantastic for a whole range of biodiversity, but if they're flooding your land, your agricultural land, that's got an economic cost. to it. So we've got to remember that the world is a complicated place. There's always winners and losers, whether that's different species or whether that's different people. And I think our role or need as a society is to come together and work out how best we can meet the most needs possible that's going to benefit people, and also compensate where that's needed as well, and compromise. So we're not talking about wall-to-wall rewilding everywhere, but I like the idea of thinking about how wild can we go, and the answer is going to be different in different places, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to think answer those questions as constructively and as with as much respect for each other as we possibly can.
So we're here in Furnace Brook in the beautiful high weald of East Sussex. What's really special about this site clearly is the fact that we have this aquatic environment, which is a hotspot by definition, or should be, for helping with the biodiversity of the whole area here. This site offers superb opportunities for reconnection with the natural world. We're in a beautiful, peaceful and tranquil space, and that's the most important place to start. So any activities we have here, on the whole, need to be in harmony with keeping that peace and tranquility, so we can connect with the birds and the wildlife around us and actually change our physiology. We'll be, hopefully by next year, increasing the aquatic margins to around the lake, and we're also applying various innovative approaches where we can do, in terms of particularly around biochar production.
So this polytunnel is very new. These plants have only been in the ground a couple of weeks. We've been kind of preparing the soil over the last 6 months or so. Biochar was a big part of that. We added as much biochar as we had at hand, which would have been, I don't know, about 100 kg or something like that. Like, quite a bit went in. Biochar helps to increase soil microbial mass. I mean, we know that now. The mechanism behind it we don't fully understand yet, but at the moment what we see is good. Most, if not, I don't know, most gardeners or farmers you've met that have used biochar in their soil will be able to tell you that there is a noticeable difference in kind of quality of crop, and et cetera, et cetera. For me personally, like farming or gardening, in terms of emulating nature, like nature never ever leaves bare soil, like anywhere. There's never bare soil in nature, and all fertility in nature really comes from, like say in a forest, it's natural, it's organic matter falling to the ground and composting, rotting down. And that's really that's the basis of everything we do here. I mean, you can see, I mean, like there's no bare soil other than on the paths, but we're trying to, never let the soil dry out. It takes quite a long time to build. It's quite a precious resource, really. I mean, to nature, really. I mean, it's so much comes from it, and it's hard won, really, soil. So yeah, we preserve it wherever possible. Promoting a diverse microbiome in your soil depends really on feeding it a diverse array of organic matter, whether that is through mulches or by, I mean, that's one way, sure, but that's usually just one type of material. Often, really, I think it's down to kind of successions of varied plants, as much diversity as possible, really. It's whatever you've got above the soil, if what you're growing is diverse, what you're feeding the soil is then diverse, and therefore, hopefully, your soil microbiome will become a little more diverse. And that's what we try to mimic with companion planting, or rather, not just companion planting, but our entire intercropping kind of practice as a whole. It aims to be as diverse as possible. If you can grow various species together that require slightly different, amounts of light and resources, you can grow more in a smaller amount of space. I don't think every rewilding project should grow food. I don't think it will necessarily be important. But I think absolutely, if there is, NEP is the big example, right? I mean, they are doing that. They've given over the vast majority of their space for rewilding, but they've still preserved little areas for food production, because really, we don't need as much space if you use it a bit more intelligently, like they're doing. One of the permaculture principles is to observe and interact, and I think if we observed much more before we interacted, I think we'd see better results, to be honest. I think that we've gone a bit too far, and we think that we know it all. And the more, I think these days is really exciting, because the more we learn about, say, biodiversity, particularly like kind of soil microbiology and the role that fungi and microbes play in all of this, it's all very much emerging. We don't know very much about it at all, but what is clear, I think what is obvious is how little we do know. And actually, I think it's time for us to maybe try not to control things so much and actually just let it do its thing.
What we're doing here is creating, as best we can, nurturing a natural space for groups, individuals and organisations to take the learnings and benefit from the site environmentally. And so those groups can come in with their ideas and their mission, their focus, and benefit from this space, rather than us trying to prescribe certain things. The natural environment does the rest by itself, particularly for the younger generations, and that's where, if part of our focus is to ensure that we can engage with schools within the Generation Restoration Initiative.
The importance of connectivity and rewilding is one of the three pillars as they were originally described. You've got like big areas, well connected, and then you've got these big animals running around, driving all sorts of exciting ecological processes that makes nature as diverse and as exciting as it can be. So connectivity is really important, but as I said, the world is full of compromise and challenge and difficulty, and you can take various projects like NEP Wildlands is just down the road from us here in Sussex, and they've got the A24 that runs right next to that property. If we have large animals as part of that ecosystem and they're walking out regularly onto the A24, we've got a serious problem there. So connectivity is really important, and striving towards more connectivity is absolutely a part of rewilding. But there may be some less desirable steps. You may need fences to stop animals hitting cars on roads and being bad for everyone involved. So big connectivity, big part of rewilding, but there are times where we're going to have to compromise.
It's really important to rewild the sea globally and locally. So locally, there has recently, back in March 2021, a new bylaw was brought into force, which essentially pushes trawling out of a large area of nearshore waters in Sussex. And this is primarily to help restore the kelp forests that used to be here. We used to have dense kelp forests up until about the 1980s.
Reducing that pressure now gives an opportunity for the kelp and many other organisms to grow bigger than they could before and thrive and create a thriving seabed habitat. Kelp are very large seaweeds, so we find them in the marine environment, in coastal areas. They're not plants, they're algae. Interesting fact that they're actually more closely related to the parasite that causes malaria than they are to plants, terrestrial plants, trees or anything like this. There used to be 30 to 40 kilometre stretch of kelp in Sussex that stretched from Worthing across and beyond Bognor, and that was there up until the late 80s. There was a big storm in 1987, a lot of people call it the Great Storm, I'm old enough to remember it.
Good afternoon. afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy.
The understanding is that this washed away quite a lot of that habitat. When we say washed away, 96% of that habitat was lost at the end of the 80s, and to this day it hasn't recovered.
So having healthy and dense kelp forests in the area is really beneficial. They help to protect the coastline from coastal erosion, they dampen the effects of strong storms.
Homes and businesses here in Haysborough are among 200,000 in England at risk of being lost to the sea by 2050. Rising sea levels mean faster rates of coastal erosion and flooding, which scientists say is caused by climate change.
They are really important nursery grounds for commercially important fish. They also bring tourism to the area. More fish in the sea, more people will come and dive and snorkel and kayak. They increase biodiversity in the area, they help with climate resilience, so they do draw down carbon.
When we talk about capturing carbon, we often think about planting trees, but trees take space on land that has a myriad of other uses. Out here, there's no such competition. The seaweed here provides a habitat for fish and it cleans up the water. It is a win-win for the environment.
It's an open debate to the full extent of the fate of this carbon. Kelp don't have a big root structure kind of sitting under the seabed, so some of that biomass will get washed out to the sea and might get buried at sea. But we don't really understand the full dynamics of that system, and that's one of the problems working in marine science, is that it's just really hard to kind of do the groundwork. You can't just put your boots on and go out for a walk. Most people don't directly experience the ocean, or even if you're living in the coastal community, you're not directly interacting with the seabed where the kelp are, and so it's difficult to engage people and to make people care about the oceans.
As part of the Wild Coast Sussex project, we are engaging with communities in different ways, and people can get involved in lots of different ways. So, for example, our partners Marine Conservation Society are working with the 16 to 25 sort of age range, and we're putting on events specifically for that group. Things like clothes swaps combined with a beach clean, so getting people thinking about that sort of circular economy. We've run Art by the Sea events, mindfulness walks. We're also hosting an ocean hackathon soon to help workshop creative ideas and solutions to sort of local conservation, marine conservation issues.
Right now, we are hopeful and I say confident that we're going to see a natural recovery.
What can rewilding teach people? I think it can teach us a lot. I mean, firstly, I feel there's a decent amount of humility involved. You know, I think there needs to be a part of our lives where we're not trying to control absolutely everything. And I think it's kind of an opportunity for a bit of freedom for us, you know, just walking in and seeing what happens rather than necessarily taking responsibility for trying to achieve absolutely everything is a big one for me. The second one is for conservation of biodiversity. You know, we're almost at a stage where we're trying to conserve species by species. You're trying to work out all the needs of every species and try and provide for that. I mean, that is an enormous challenge. You know, I can't see how you can do that, you know, really, every species in the world. We haven't even named them all, let alone worked out what they all need. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for really understanding about how nature works in that connected way. You know, nature was doing fine before human beings. You know, it was increasing its biodiversity, increasing its complexity, you know, and its wonder, you know, with all these fantastic species that we can enjoy today.
slippery roads and sunburned